he came up with these crazy conspiracy theories about the royal family being behind their deaths. Did you feel comfortable saying that on his behalf when it was proven to be nothing more than conspiracy theories?
Well, if I told you that the French forensic pathologist and the French forensic toxicologist refused to come to the inquest in London or give evidence by video link, and they were the people who knew about the samples taken from Henri Paul, and there was a strong possibility, and it was established in the evidence. I sat there for six months. I heard every day's evidence that there was a doubt whether in the morgue, where there were people who had died at the same time of suicide, having ingested carbon monoxide and drunk, in other words, suicides who'd gassed themselves with car exhausts, whether there'd been a mix-up of the blood samples. But it was never being satisfactorily decided because those two French gentlemen refused to give evidence.
We speak now to Michael Cole, the former royal correspondent who worked as Director of Public Affairs for Harrods and as spokesman for Al-Fayed. Good morning to you, Michael.
Good morning, Chloe. Good morning, Callum.
Morning.
Your reaction, first of all, this morning?
Well, naturally, I'm terribly sad. I knew Mohamed for 37 years. I worked for him for only 10, but we always remained friends. He actually died on Wednesday, which is the day before the 26th anniversary of the terrible death of his oldest son, Dodi, and the family's dear friend, Diana, Princess of Wales, in Paris in 1997. And he was entombed in a mausoleum next to his son yesterday. He had a tremendous life. You've alluded to that. He was a very colourful character. A lot of people who worked for him and his customers and the fans of his football club got to know the real Mohamed. And he was a very open-hearted and very kind and very generous person in more ways than I could probably number. He did more good in the world than all his critics rolled together. And I'm very sorry that he's dead, because he was a life-enhancing figure and he tremendously supported this country. He believed in it. He brought a lot of wealth here and he worked tirelessly for it. You've alluded to the fact that he never received his passport. He made an application for naturalization as a British citizen. But that was refused by the British government, the major government. And that came 4 months after he'd made revelations about cash for questions, about the corruption at the heart of the Conservative Party.
Which he had paid, but he had paid those MPs, so he was kind of implicated.
Yeah, there's nothing illegal about paying MPs. At this very minute, trade unions are paying MPs and big companies who retain MPs are paying them. What is illegal is failing to record that. And as a result of those revelations, Lord Nolan investigated and set up the 7 Nolan principles of public life. And what happened was a Parliamentary Commission of Standards was appointed. And for the first time in Parliament's history, the power of Parliament, sovereignty, was taken outside Parliament. The MPs had previously adjudicated on their own behaviour through the Privileges Committee. After that, it was necessary to have an outside person. And my goodness, what we've seen in the Commons in recent years, don't we need a judge, a referee?
Okay, so you're saying he was a force for good, but we can't forget. I mean, in the Times today, there's a very well written obituary in the Times today, which describes him as a secretive businessman who gloried in what he regarded as the right kind of publicity to achieve his aims, a foul-mouthed, misogynist street bully when he wanted to be, who was capable of extraordinary generosity, especially to children. Do you recognise that as a fair description of him?
Martha, do you accept the fact that I knew him for 36 years? If you do, 37 years, if you do, I can tell you that I never heard him raise his voice and I never heard him use profane language. Certain magazines, Private Eye, depicted him as foul-mouthed. I never heard him swear, and I've lived and worked in newsrooms throughout my professional life, and I've heard some very right languages in newsrooms, maybe even in your own So I know from what I say, it is a fact. I never heard him swear. I never heard him raise his voice. I never heard him lose his temper.
Was he a misogynist?
No, I think not. I mean, he loved his wife. He loved children. His store mainly catered to women. I mean, he was never happier going down to the charcuterie counter and slicing off some salami for some of his customers and talking to them. The fact is that if you talk to the people who actually knew him, who worked for him, who were his customers, they have a completely different view from people who sit in ivory towers and take pot shots at him. He was, of course, larger than life, and he did some of the things that you've said, but he did it with a great deal of style, a great deal of humour. He was not self-important. He didn't fit into the British establishment, and I think some people could never forgive an Egyptian for having bought their favourite store in Brompton Road, Harrods.
But was it not also the fact, I mean, he was accused of treating women incredibly badly. In the Times obituary today, it quotes a 17-year-old girl who said that Al-Fayed told her once, "I need you around me all the time. If you don't sleep with me, I can't help you with your acting career." It also says in the Times obituary that he bribed policemen to make sure around his home he could basically get away with what he wanted to do. He was ruthless. He was described by Neil Hamilton's QC in that failed libel trial as a deeply dishonest man. Do you recognise any of those traits?
Well, all I can say, I was there. My office was 2 doors away from him. I never, ever witnessed anything of that kind, ever. I mean, with my work,
I guess you wouldn't, though, would you? Isn't that the point? If you're going to behave like that, you wouldn't do it in front of people?
Well, then can you then castigate them anonymously after they're dead? I mean, where is the evidence? I mean, he lived here all those years. Never once was he accused of anything, of a speeding ticket or dropping a sweet paper in the street, ever. I mean, it's all very well for an obituarist after the event to make these accusations. Why weren't they made at the time? I certainly never heard of them, or else I would have had to have countered them.
Well, we spoke to Tom Bower earlier on, who's the unofficial biographer of Mohamed Al-Fayed, and he made much stronger allegations than that on air here just after 7 o'clock this morning. I just wonder, were you ever put in a position as his spokesman of having to say things that you felt uncomfortable with at the time, that maybe you didn't agree with him, but as your role as spokesperson, you had to put forward his point of view?
I always argued with him and sometimes disagreed. Usually he listened to what I said, but I think I retired from Harrods of my own volition in March 1998, because I wanted to set up my own company, and I'd reached the age of 55 then, and I wanted to take a pensioned retirement. I would never, ever say anything I couldn't stand by or I didn't believe to be the truth, and back it up as best I can with arguments and facts. It's very hard dealing with innuendo of that kind, but that comes with the territory. When you're a big target, somebody's going to say these things about you. If they were true, why weren't they brought to the attention of the authorities at the time? Wasn't prosecution mounted? There never were, and I never heard about anything of that kind, and I never saw anything. And what can you do as a journalist and as a colleague? Only report and act upon what you see and hear.
Did you feel comfortable with his response to the death of Dodi Al-Fayed and Diana, Princess of Wales? I mean, he was insistent that Henri Paul, who was the driver of the car, was the chauffeur provided by Mohamed Al-Fayed, that he hadn't been drinking excessively, he wasn't over the limit, he hadn't been taking drugs. Yet that's exactly what the post-mortem showed. He came up with these crazy conspiracy theories about the royal family being behind their deaths. Did you feel comfortable saying that on his behalf when it was proven to be nothing more than conspiracy theories?
Well, if I told you that the French forensic pathologist and the French forensic toxicologist refused to come to the inquest in London or give evidence by video link, and they were the people who knew about the samples taken from Henri Paul, and there was a strong possibility, and it was established in the evidence. I sat there for six months. I heard every day's evidence that there was a doubt whether they're in the morgue where there were people who had died at the same time of suicide, having ingested carbon monoxide and drunk. In other words, suicides who'd gassed themselves with car exhausts, whether there'd been a mix-up of the blood samples. But it was never being satisfactorily decided because those two French gentlemen refused to give evidence. So there is doubt about it. If you wanted to explore everything in this, which I would be quite happy to do, but we'd be here till next week. There's an excellent book written independently by an Australian forensic accountant who took an interest in this. And he wrote a book called How They Murdered Princess Diana. And the last two chapters are very compelling reading, which actually blows apart a lot of the evidence that was given at the inquest. And I sat there for 6 months. I heard people lying their head off as witnesses who came into court and did so. Okay. And in that, yes, I did.
So you believed you believed what Mohamed Al-Fayed was saying in those conspiracy theories, which is interesting. Were you still in contact?
No, hang on. Let me just say, Martha, I believe that it was not an accident, and I share the view of 11 ordinary Londoners, the jury, and they brought in the most serious verdict they could bring in, which was death. Oh my goodness, why? It's an early morning. Unlawful killing. They brought in a verdict of unlawful killing, and they brought in the verdict of unlawful killing because the coroner, Mr. Justice Scott Baker, Thomas Scott Baker, not now Lord Scott Baker, he told the jury on day one of the inquest, and he told them at the end in his summing up, that they could not return a verdict of murder. And he and his counsel, who is now the Lord Chief Justice until 23rd of September when he steps down, Lord Burnett, they worked very hard to get an accidental death verdict. But those jurors who heard all the evidence, unlike yourself, may I say, brought in the most serious verdict they could, which was one of unlawful killing. And I believe that that is the right verdict, and that's what I believe in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The coroner's inquest on the 7th of April 2008, the jury did record a verdict of unlawful killing as a result of gross negligence of the driver, Henri Paul, and indeed the paparazzi. Michael Cole, thank you so much for your time today.
It wasn't actually the paparazzi. It was following vehicles. There is a big difference.
OK, thank you for clarifying that. Michael Cole, thank you for your time. He's former royal correspondent and worked as Director of Public Affairs for Harrods and as a spokesman for Mohamed Al-Fayed.